Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone to this nonprofit navigation on organizational self-care. I'm Julie Klima, and I have the pleasure of serving as the managing director here at the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership at UMKC. The Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership catalyzes nonprofit and community organizations' success through education, engagement, research, and service. Today's program is part of a semi-regular series that we do of virtual discussions about tools and topics nonprofits can use to deliver on their missions more effectively and take care of themselves and their teams while doing it. So we're going to ask our participants to stay on mute when we're in this room together and use chat for questions, but we'll also be breaking out into smaller groups during the session. So joining us today are Lisa Chandler, Director of Collaborative Learning, and Beth Harmon, Learning Manager, both at Cornerstones of Care. And with that, I'll turn it over to you two.
Right. Well, it's a delight to have everyone here today. And I have been at Cornerstone since 2005, but have a lot of experience in organizations where trauma is pretty common and lots of need for self-care. So I have years of youth ministry experience. I have years of experience as a therapeutic foster parent, and now in an organization that serves children and families. Beth, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
My name's Beth Harmon, and I started a long time ago, before there was a Cornerstones of Care, when there were six different agencies, and then we came together as one. And I'm a big advocate for trauma awareness and trauma-informed care because it helps explain the behaviors and the interactions we see with individuals. It also gives us a pathway to help teach them more socially acceptable ways of regulating and taking care of themselves. And I think that every time we practice good trauma-informed interactions, we lessen the ripples of trauma through our communities and our country.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about self-care, the importance of self-care for individuals, but what happens and how organizations can even support that, and how organizational self-care is a significant part of that. So as we look at that, this is sort of where we're headed today, because we know that adversity does come in all sizes and all times and all places. And the best way to be prepared for adversity, both individually and as organizations, is when we are engaging in self-care that increases our resources to manage that. So that's where we're headed today.
So today we're going to introduce you to a tool, a practice that we use to help support each other and maintain self-care and trauma-informed interventions with the people we work with, our teams. Everyone at Cornerstones of Care, anybody that comes to a meeting at Cornerstones of Care would practice this community meeting. Our clients, our stakeholders, and it's three simple questions. The first one is, how are you feeling today? And that can be, content, agitated, enthusiastic, shy. And then the second question is, what is your goal for our time together? So it could to learn more about, to come up with a plan. And then throughout the day, we sometimes hit roadblocks. And so we model how to appropriately ask for help. And so it would be, who can you ask for help? And the goal is to name a specific person who will be accountable for helping you obtain your goal and or provide support. So we'd like to break out into rooms and have a community meeting in small groups.
So you may want to take a screenshot of the three questions if you have a short-term memory, like I sometimes do.
Great idea.
And it is done dialogical, Beth. You want to talk about
that?
Yes.
You Ask the person next to you. We do this in a circle or square, however you're set up. In Zoom, it's like a box, right? And the first person would ask, how are you feeling? What's your goal? And who will you ask for help? And then it passes along the circle. Make sure you ask the questions because that helps build community and connection. Don't just rattle off, oh, I'm agitated. I'm going to learn something new today and I'm going to ask Lisa for help. That's not how it works. You ask the questions one at a time and they're answered one at a time.
That's great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put everybody into breakout rooms.
Well, thanks. I hope that was a good experience for folks to just check in with your feelings, which is an important part of where we're going because self-care does focus in several areas. And so we need to attend to our personal needs when it comes first to our physical needs. So, taking care of our bodies includes what we eat and what we avoid, how we move and rest. And then the things like, our regular dental appointments and mammograms, following doctor's recommendations, all of those are a part of physical self-care. Sometimes when we ask people, hey, what do you do for self-care? Most people just list the kind of pampering things that they do for themselves. And pampering has a role, but pampering is only a very small part of what should be a robust self-care program. So attending to our personal needs is important. We also need to attend to our psychological needs. How do we take care of our brains and our self-talk? How do we grow and learn and meet those pieces? Learn how to settle ourselves, learn how to do all of that. So self-care gives us time to do those things, reflection, and a variety. We also need to take care of our personal needs in the social realm. And our relationships include things like taking care of boundaries. Do we have good boundaries? How much time do we spend with the people who fill us up, and how much time do we spend with the people that require from us, that require our energy and our attention and maybe drain us? And how do we find a balance with those so that it's a flowing through us? So that's a part of self-care, is how we meet our social needs and how we spend time. Maybe with folks who don't talk about work, or we set times with our coworkers to say, hey, let's do a lunch where we're not talking about business. We're just spending time in relationship. Can be a part of self-care. And then there's the moral self-care. And that's about how do we feed our spirits? For some of us, that includes religion or faith. For some of us, that includes time in nature. That may include philanthropic engagement, recognizing our place in the world, those kinds of things that nurture us. And so I will be dropping an assessment, a self-care assessment in the chat here in a moment, just to use as a tool maybe to assess, am I meeting some of these areas? At Cornerstones, we use a variety of different assessments at different times. Some of them are around secondary trauma, some are around burnout. This particular one looks at a lot of these areas in self-care and asks, how are we doing that? So I'll drop that here shortly while Beth is taking over.
These are some of the reasons that organizations and agencies promote self-care. In the chat, please list some of the ways your organization encourages self-care. We have unlimited time away. So See there, Lisa, I told you we shouldn't be having meetings on Fridays. Flexibility, summer breaks, fun factory events. Excellent. Excellent. EAP, that's another excellent way we promote self care. Check ins. We'll get to that a little bit later. All right. Good list. Good list. And does your organization promote self care? Sometimes we say we do this, we do that, and then we don't follow through as an organization. So, are there ways your organization has encouraged people to take self care, to do their self care? Incentives, maybe. Paid volunteer time. Yeah, Julie, we used to not, if we saved our PTO at the end of the year, we could sell back 80 hours, and people were just frazzled because they weren't taking their PTO because they wanted that money. Yeah, sometimes we're going to talk a little bit about shaming people about boundaries and limiting their time. Great. Those are great suggestions and ideas. And I'm glad that organizations are promoting good self care.
So, what happens sometimes is that an organization has norms, and while we want to promote self care, who might have experienced this? You're a high performer, and you learn that because you're a high performer, oh, this is a really tough case, but we know you're so good at those tough cases. And while on one hand, it's like it reaffirms you, on the other hand, it's like, oh. And so sometimes organizations have to pay attention to how do we set up our norms, and do they really encourage self-care, or do we give certain people all cases like that because they're pretty good at it, but anybody, when you're doing one thing all the time or working with the challenging ones, that's a primary setup for burnout. I think, Beth, didn't you learn something about burnout recently?
Yes, yesterday I was on one of my, you know, I get stuck on these things, and I read, and I wish I had written down the source. It says burnout affects your high achievers and your passionate workers more frequently and to a greater degree than it does to those employees that are just on the edge of performing. So your high performers tend to burn out faster than your average or subpar worker. I found that interesting. I think they put stress on themselves and then the stress of their job because they're passionate.
Yeah, so what we want to think about is why sometimes are organizations unable to promote individual self-care. One of the things that we teach at Cornerstones of Care, of course, is a lot of co-regulation, because we work with individuals and families who have a lot of high emotion um, activity going on. And how do we co-regulate? And we know that somebody who's does not have their emotions regulated can't help someone else regulate because of those mirror neurons that are built in our brains. And it is very similar with organizations. We know that they face a lot of stresses, and how an organization handles their stresses also relates. So when you look at this list of things around the room, has your organization experienced any of those? Do you have examples of how organizations, just like individuals, experience stress? I'm seeing turnover mentioned. Yeah, some of us, especially in the nonprofit sector, one of the things that happens is you lose a contract or you lose a grant, or the grant is only for this amount of time and now you got to find funding somewhere else. That can be a big structure. The political climate does create a lot of challenges. Some of those in the family services sector are concerned about what we read in 2025. Wow, how will that impact our work if that becomes the norm of the country?
Organizational change is a big one.
Yes, those of you who know Cornerstones know that other than Chad, our entire C-suite a couple of years ago all shifted about the same time. And the other thing is that our organization, as Beth mentioned, went from multiple organizations to merging into one. And only because of our trauma-informed model practices did we do that and manage the stress in a way that was not harmful. It while there were pain, there's always some discomfort and pain in changes. It really helped the process. Yeah, so we know that when those things happen, an organization, just like an individual, it uses up some of their resources. So what we know is that when individuals or organizations or teams are experiencing either celebrative and great things, positive things, resilient, or they're experiencing adversity and not handling that adversity well, the feelings, thoughts, and behaviors often get shared. I mentioned that co-regulation in our mirror neurons, and it happens with groups as well as individuals. So you may have a stress that happens in one small part of your organization that may share across the organization widely. If, for instance, there's been some huge change in funding and maybe just your C-suite knows about that, still the emotional regulation and the stress and the way they're suddenly thinking about policies and practice and procedures sometimes inadvertently just flows through the organization. And we see it in how we relate to the direct service or the place where you meet with the community. And so we're going to look a little bit at that, at both sides of that, when we look at trauma.
So we use van der Kolk's definition of trauma for individuals and organizations, and it is when traumatization occurs when both internal and external resources are inadequate to cope with external threat. So everybody faces adversity. Everybody's faced probably a little bit of adversity this morning if you had to drive in traffic, if you're nervous about presenting. But we have internal resources, our intellect, our emotional management, our creativity, our skills at relationship building to help buffer these. And if I lack something, say I was having a complete come apart about present today, I could reach out to Lisa as a resource to say, you need to calm down, right? Other resources are external resources, and that's money, healthcare, housing, or knowing where to get those resources to maintain your way of life. Organizations face adversity all the time, positive and negative adversity. I told Lisa, whether it's good press or bad press, it's a stressor. And how we handle it as an organization affects whether we grow from it or we become traumatized by it. So if we don't practice good self-care, if we don't have the resources to manage our adversity, then if I get discombobulated and depressive and lash out, then Lisa might start lashing out. It's contagious. And then the whole organization becomes traumatized. And some of the symptoms of a traumatized organization are that we become hyper aroused. There's the rumor mill starts. People aren't managing their emotion. Relationships start to become impoverished. And we know relationships are a huge external resources for managing trauma and adversity. We don't learn from our experiences. And then we just see the solution one way and one way only. And that doesn't go for growth and change. So when organization becomes traumatized and we start feeding off the feelings and thoughts of others, you know what happens? Leadership gets all directional. It's just all, this is how it is. And so that carries out if leadership says to the director level, this is how we're doing it, and the director says, this is how you're doing it, and nobody has any choice, then we feel disempowered and we lose complexity in our thoughts and our processes. We get aggressive, and I don't say people are running around hitting each other, but we might say something. We might be passive aggressive. We might forget little deadlines and things. And we forget, and we have a loss of imagination and vision. And then we lose sight of the mission. Everything we do should be mission driven. So, symptoms of a traumatized organization is just it's organizational, emotional dysregulation. And it goes from individuals to groups to the organization.
So what do we do about that? And a part of it is building this resilient culture that increases our internal and our external resources to manage the adversity that comes. Because even if we were in a ideal society right now and we had all the funding we needed and so on, is still going to be adversity. There still may be conflict. There still may be something unexpected that comes up. And so we know that adversity is just the constant. So we're going to look at kind of just a brief overview sort of today. We don't have a lot of time of 3 areas though, where we can do something that helps both our organizational self-care as well as our individual self-care as we work through that. So the first place we're going to look at how do we have a shared understanding of organizational dynamics? Every organization would need to kind of individualize that for their specific thing. And that's the way individuals relate. That's the way teams work. How does authority fall in here? What's regulated? What's not? How can we change the rules? Then there's established norms based on shared values. And that is, what can we all agree that we are committed to? And how do we talk about that? And then how does that show itself in the way that we are working together? And then we have a regular practices and tools that we use on a regular basis to drive the culture. Because what we've learned, and we embraced the sanctuary model of trauma-informed care to help us support our culture. Beth was a part of the original team that we sent to New York back in 2009, Beth?
2009.
To begin to embed that particular model in our work. And what we learned is that just like physical fitness has to happen every day if we're to maintain it. If we sit on the couch for a week because we sprained our ankle and we get back up, it's like, oh yeah, I haven't exercised my heart as rigorously, or I haven't done all of these things. And so our culture and our trauma-informed, trauma-responsive culture is only strong as we keep practicing it on a regular basis. And so the regular practices and tools and rituals are what help us to do that. So we're going to take a look at each of those 3 areas. I'm going to give you a couple of samples of the shared knowledge and of organizational dynamics that we deal with. And because we could do, I don't know, we have a whole 3-hour training up to that on just this one reenactment kind of thing. But we know that when folks are dealing with adversity, either individually, as a team, as an organization, as a society, that there's the opportunity for primary trauma, secondary trauma, chronic stress, burnout, vicarious trauma, which we define as the buildup that changes your perspective over a long time. So we make sure that we have a common language around, wow, I may be experiencing this, or hey, I'm noticing this. Is that going on? So we help people know about those things. And one of the big ways to know is whether we see them operating in what we call the trauma reenactment triangle, which there's these three roles. This is a very common model in a lot of, you'll see it in some leadership programs, you'll see it in other places. In our model, we specifically look at how trauma gets brought into that, and how when these three roles are going on, once you're in the triangle, you're in the conflict, and you may even switch roles with this. So an example is I might be driving to work and some person cuts in front of me too close, and I may jump in the triangle thinking I'm the victim. Wow, they put my safety at risk. And then I may jump over to the villain role, that blankety, blankety, whatever. And I may be the hero role, oh, I'm going to protect that from other people. So I may turn on my flashers, or I may give wide berth. I may cross two lanes to keep somebody else from doing that. So once we're in the triangle, we can float among the roles. And that's a very significant portion of then how we identify that each other. And Beth and I have signals that we give each other if we kind of picture that one of us is in that triangle. That's like, oh yeah, how do we step back out? So it's an example of how we use co-regulation in our organization. Then another part of the organizational dynamics that we want everybody in our agency to learn is how change impacts individuals and organizations. So, for instance, when we went through having 5 different boards, and we were creating one board, and we had 5 different PTO policies, paid time off policies, and 5 different benefit packages, and navigating all through that. Well, that impacted not just the organizational on a budget level and all of that, but that impacted every individual. Oh, what if my healthcare plan goes away? And so how do you navigate change? So we teach a lot about how individuals, teams, and organizations react when change occurs, and what are some of the skills needed to successfully go through change. And then we do regular assessments to say, wait a minute, let's pause and let's think, what big changes did we face in the last year? So a team might talk about, wow, we had a person who knew a lot, had been here a long time, and that person retired. And so we lost that organizational knowledge. And our team had this suicide of one of our clients, and this team. And so how did that impact the team? How did we communicate about that? Do we still have losses we need to address with that? So when it comes to helping with our self-care, we need to acknowledge what has been the change, what are the losses, what are the costs, and how has that impacted our internal resources and our external resources and our ability to access them. So it's a couple of areas of the shared knowledge of organizational dynamics that we cover. Beth?
So, as Lisa stated, we use the sanctuary model, not only for treatment, but we also use the sanctuary model when we are talking about a change initiative. And we use the 7 commitments as our norms. We also, Lisa talked about, we review changes, we review history, and we frame that in self. And we look at the safety of the situation, the 4 kinds of safety: physical, emotional, social, and moral safety, the emotions that it is triggering or could possibly trigger, the loss, because change means loss, and then we look at the future. So, our mission statement is partnering to create healthy communities. And we use the 7 commitments to push that mission forward. And we start with a commitment to nonviolence. And that's helping to build safety skills and a commitment to a higher purpose. We also look at to emotional intelligence, and that's to teach emotional management skills. And one of the most basic first skills we teach people is to recognize patterns in themselves and others. So I know if I start avoiding coming to the office, I know I need to look deeper, right? Emotional intelligence. Social learning, that's to help build cognitive skills, because when we're under adversity and trauma, we aren't as open to cognitive development, and we might not see a way out. So we want to learn from others. Open communication, and I always say open communication, the simple way is saying what you mean without being mean. And I have to watch that sometimes because I can say something I think is funny, but it's really, kind of edgy. But open communication is helping to overcome barriers to healthy communication, learn conflict management, reduce acting out, enhance self protective and self correcting skills, and teach healthy boundaries. Democracy is helping to create civic skills of social control and discipline, and administration of healthy authority. A commitment to social responsibility is helping to rebuild social connection skills, establish healthy attachment relationships, and establish a sense of fair play and justice. And of course, one of the greatest motivators for people that work in social service or non-for-profits is a commitment to growth and change. And that's helping to work through the loss and prepare for the future. Whether that's helping someone else work through the loss or working through the loss ourselves, it's preparing for the future, keeps us hopeful. So some of the ways we have made sure that we keep committing to our norms and our values is that we practice the community meeting. Julie said she had done a community meeting when she'd had meetings with Cornerstones. And when we interview somebody, because the training team is growing, so we interview people and we start with this community meeting. If they haven't done any research, they're kind of taken aback. How often have people said, "How are you feeling today?" And then they won't go with an okay. They're like, "No, I ask how you're feeling." So we use the community meeting to gauge the level of emotion in the room. For example, if we're in a training team meeting and Lisa says, "How are you feeling today, Beth?" And I say, "Overwhelmed." She said, "What's your goal?" And I'm like, "To manage these 2 projects I've got going on. Who can you ask for help?" And I say something, Ted. Well, she's going to think in her head and she's going to say, "Well, today's not the day to tell Beth I've got another project for her because I'm overwhelmed." It helps manage the group temperature. I'm not, Lisa says, "I am just so sad. I'm going to look to raise her up today, not to look to her to raise me up." And it helps with self-care, it helps with boundary, and then it helps manage those parallel processes we see.
Beth, the other thing it does for me is it helps me transition, because sometimes I've got emotions that are from something else that already happened. And it helps me think, okay, that's what I'm feeling. I need to let that go and be fully present in this room at this moment with this meeting.
Yeah. Name it to tame it.
There we go. Yeah, so that was some of our norms and practices. We have lots of others along that way. And some of those, to keep our norms going, we also have just the regular practices and tools. And so this is the list of the tools from the Sanctuary Toolkit. But we would just want to introduce you to a couple of things, because you don't have to be a sanctuary organization to come up with the tools that work in your organization. And we have worked with others. We've worked with others who've adopted the Missouri model. We've helped through our Trauma Sensitive School Summit, we've helped schools find ways to embed practices that work for them. We're sharing the ones that we know the best because they're the ones we practice every day. These are just some of the things that are regular parts of our practice, some of the tools that we use. So one of the things that we do, every team member who joins Cornerstones of Care is required to have a written self-care plan. They don't have to share it with anyone else, but they have to have it. And you'll notice the middle form, and that's the form on the left. The form on in the middle is a self and supervision form that a manager uses at least once a month, goes over at least once a month with a team member. And you'll notice about halfway down, you're checking on their safety plan and their self-care plan. So the safety plan is one of those rituals and tools that we have. Every single person at Cornerstones of Care, whether they are the cook in our residential cafeteria, or whether it's the chief financial officer, or one of our caseworkers who's going out to do foster care, has to have their list of 5 things, a minimum of 5 things that helps them manage their emotions in the moment. What can I do right now that will help my big emotions be managed? Because we know neurologically, if you don't keep re-triggering that emotion, the neurotransmitters that made it happen will diminish within 90 seconds, maximum of 90 seconds. So my safety plan is, what can I do in those 90 seconds to keep me from saying or doing something that I will regret? How do I pull myself back to the best? So we check safety plans. The self-care plan, we ask team members, how's your self-care plan working? Are you making adequate use of it? And how do we do that? There are other things. So our supervision form, which may be in addition to all kinds of other supervision that needs to happen in the meeting, but this is sort of the check-in, is how are we doing with our culture, our sanctuary culture? And so we have safety plans, self-care plans, and this self and supervision tool that you'll notice asks people, have you been in the triangle? And allows people to talk about, yeah, I was, or no, I'm so proud. I felt sucked in because somebody was trying to make me the persecutor, the villain, and I stepped out. I was able to manage that. So those are some of the regular practicing tools. And what that does for our organization, when it's time for my supervision, I fill this format and it's time to reflect. Because in the nonprofit world, sometimes we're operating with maybe not adequate staff, or we know we have all these missions, and we don't always encourage people to take the time to reflect. Hey, am I doing okay with that? And to be honest with themselves, because all of us make up stories in our head, sometimes that validate or remove cognitive dissonance when we don't do well. And our culture says, hey, mistakes and failures are opportunities to learn. And so we really seek honest reflection that then we can grow and learn from. So I fill out this form and I'm reflecting, let me think. How did that work? How safe do I feel? How have I managed my emotions? And then I submit that to my manager, and we have an opportunity to talk through it. I'm the gatekeeper. I can put on there what I want to put on there. And so if there's something personal, for instance, my team members are very different. I have one team member that puts their whole life on this form. I know everything that's going on with their family, and there are others who are very private, and I know primarily what's impacted their work. And both of those are okay depending on what that team member needs. We have learned that the sanctuary culture does embed not just our personal experiences, but our shared ones as well.
Lisa, I'm just going to pop in. We had a question in the chat. Are these documents available on your website, or could you share versions of these with us?
We are glad to share versions of these. Yes. Yeah. And so, Julie, is the best way to drop them in the chat now, or is the best way, because I know you have some people who log on later, is it better to email you and then they can be emailed out?
If you want to email me all the resources, we will add those in as links to our email when we send out the recording.
All right. And that's what I'll be glad to do. Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that I'm going to pause there because we have our next thought. What questions do you have? We wanted to allow a few minutes to respond to that. Or if there's something you'd like us to talk a little bit more about, because we were just kind of giving an overview of some of the things that help an organization learn to address the organizational challenges and trauma, and then be able to really encourage and support the individual self-care.
I'm going to jump in with a question that I got privately, which asks, and I want to summarize this so that we don't give anything away, but I think the gist of this question is about how do you introduce some of these, how do you get leadership buy-in for some of these? Culture is not exclusively a leadership thing, right? But it does have to have leadership buy-in. So do you have any advice on that? And or, personally, just, introducing the concept of community meetings to a team? That's kind of two different questions.
Right. So one of the things, if you go back to some of the reasons that we had, I'm going to share this so we can actually see faces. When we go back to some of the reasons that we talked about why organizations do encourage self-care, some of those same reasons are really good examples of what we can use to advocate for that. What we know, and there's research to back it, is that when your employees have opportunities to manage their emotions and take self-care and buy into some of these practices that help us be whole people, there's documentation that it's fewer sick days. That certainly helps the organizational's bottom line. It creates a more positive and productive culture. Some of it is counterintuitive. And so you may need to take the research that says, guess what? If I'm working on this project and I know I have this deadline and I may feel like I cannot get up from my desk because the deadline is approaching, just taking a 3-minute break, whether you're walking, whether you come back and you're less likely to make mistakes and you're ready to work faster. The research shows that happens, even though intuitively we're like, I don't have time to take a break. I don't have time to take a break. So that research can support some of these things going on. Another way is that it will help leaders make more informed decisions. We have lots of examples where there's a term we didn't even address today, but that is a very big part of our organization, which is collective disturbance. And so it helps us assess. It's like, if I want this team to do the best work and we've got a new proposal that we need to write for some new work, I need to think, do I want that team to do it? Do I want them to have input? How does that, if I'm expecting this new project over here, the more all of the research shows that the more input I get from folks helps them to have buy-in and to have the energy to move forward and to do that well. So all of there are lots of various approaches, and it depends on, if you're wanting your leadership to take a small step or you're wanting your leadership to take a big step about that. But the fact is what we're learning is that that developing this kind of culture really does, A, create better outcomes, and B, help the financial bottom line. Turnover is a huge cost. If we have a turnover calculator that calculates blue costs and green costs, so both the money costs, but also the morale and the loss of organizational knowledge costs and so on. And just implementing something that will reduce turnover by even 10% is amazing.
That's great. That actually leads into a question. Somebody asked about, you have lots of tools for an organization who doesn't have the capacity to do everything at once. Do you have 2 or 3 things that you might suggest as a starting place? And I'm guessing community meetings might be one of those. I'm hoping, because I want to hear about how to introduce that. But I'll let you answer that question first.
Community meetings are, they call it the cornerstone of the sanctuary model. And it's based in a lot of work done in Great Britain about group therapy. And so it's based in science. And I would just start saying, hey, I want to do a community meeting when we have a meeting. I just want to check in on everybody, frame it as a team building tactic at first, and then move into the trauma. But the second thing I would hit hard. And, Lisa and I are very different in our approaches. And, I come from a long line of being a compliance officer. So I love the toolkit because they're measurable. And the safety plan is the second thing I would do, because that is, most of the problems we get into at work are when we pop off our mouth. And so if I can just stop and take that pause. So community meeting, safety plans, and self-care are the 3 big ones I would hit first.
That's brilliant. We have a question about the community meeting, which is the question about the goal for the day related, or the question of the goal related to the meeting itself or related to the whole day?
That varies on the situation in which we're using it. When we use it in our residential program with our adolescents, they start with a community meeting in the morning, and theirs is their goal for the day. What are they planning to do for the day? If my team is meeting to plan for 2025, the goal might be adapted to say, what's the goal that you have for 2025?
Yep. And somebody asked, Beth, can you repeat those 3 again? The 3 things that you would recommend?
Community meeting, safety plan, self-care plan.
And are those all things that, Lisa, you'll be sending me that we can include with recording?
Yes, 2 of those were actually on those documents. One was the self-care plan, and an example of a self-care plan and an example of a safety plan. The other thing is we have a lot of versions of self-care plans, because the one that we have it just guides you to think in all of those realms of your life. But some people find that overwhelming, and a self-care plan is only good if you're using the things that are on it. So we encourage people to think that way, but then to come up with one that's very short and that they know that they will follow through on every activity there.
That's excellent.
I will also say this. Because we're a sanctuary certified organization, we're certified by the Sanctuary Institute every 3 years. And we've been doing this since 2009. We did not start with where we are now. And in fact, that model rolled out, you learn one tool. And that month, everybody in the organization practices that one tool. Then we rolled out a second tool. So it is, when you're starting from scratch, it is a process of building that. And we've just become very, very robust at that point.
That's excellent. Somebody in the chat asked if you would include both the short plan and the long plan for the self-care plans.
Yes, I can certainly do that. Yeah, because we've developed versions that we use with children and with parents. And so we have all kinds of, and some individuals are just like, oh, I found this one, I really want to use this one. And it's fine. As long as they have a self-care plan, it doesn't matter what it looks like. But I can share 2 or 3, examples of all of those.
That's wonderful. Any last questions? Feel free to come off mute if anybody's got any, or feel free to put them in the chat or chat them to me directly if you don't want to ask. I'm watching, and I'm not seeing anything. I'm seeing lots of thank yous. I had somebody that dropped off earlier and wanted to let you all know that she's anxious to catch up with the recording. And I know there's lots of people that'll be reviewing this in the recording. I know I've taken away a ton from this, so I just want to say huge, huge gratitude to you, Lisa and Beth, for sharing these, for the work that Cornerstones does in the community. To everybody who joined this call, this is all the work that you're doing in our community is what makes our community great. And, nonprofits don't get enough accolades, I think, for all the important work that you all do in the community. And that's why we're here. And I will send out make sure that we get the recording sent out with all these resources. And the Midwest Center is here as a resource. And I encourage you to check out all the great work that Cornerstones is doing. So I hope this has started everybody's day off well, and go forth and do good work, everybody. Bye-bye.